Before I begin, it's important to note that despite my demeanor and fairly dull voice, I do in fact have a sense of humor. It's a little off kilter from what many think is humorous. For instance, I do not find slapstick funny. At all. And I find quote unquote cringe humor actively annoying at the best of times. But I do have a sense of humor. Non cringe situational humor seems to be able to make me laugh quite often. I've also nearly passed out laughing at some of the jokes in Go for Skyrim videos. Now that you know I'm not some humorless automaton, I want to talk about a joke I find at best in bad taste, and at worst actively damaging to the company making the joke. Please note, all of this may just be me overthinking the situation. Civitai, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, is a repository of text-to-image models and many other so-called AI tools, mostly for stable diffusion and comfy UI. These tools are used for image generation and even image-to-video animation. Don't ask me how any of these things work on their back end, I have no idea. Now, this site has an honestly very well-trained and useful chatbot assistant called CivBot. It was clearly created to help with most things Stable Diffusion and Civitai, and seemingly not much if anything else, making it very capable of its one job. I've never had any issue asking said bot questions and receiving accurate answers. This isn't to say the bot getting something wrong is impossible, but it is well made, so that is very rare. And it usually only happens when its info is out of date, and if it doesn't know something or is not allowed to touch on a subject, it will say as much, saving you some time rather than giving you the runaround. So, why did I tell you about CivBot? Well, it's necessary context for the actively problematic April Fool's joke performed by said website. Now, I won't say that just because Civitai is a business, that they can't perform April Fool's jokes or celebrate any random holiday or custom. No. The real problem is the length and frankly substance of said joke. The first problem is the length of the joke. It started on or before the 1st of April, and is supposed to end, well, on the same day of this recording, April the 8th. The length being as big a problem as it is, will make more sense once I go over the substance. Speaking of which, the other problem, the substance of said joke, is definitely worse, and the reason the length of said joke is such a problem. So, the substance. Civitai has decided to replace its very well-trained and helpful chatbot with an intentionally antagonistic tsundere bot whose personality is roughly speaking what would happen if Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club was a support chatbot that was also channeling Pre-Shippuden and Sakura's worst moments at all times. It is called Civchan. This is bad enough, but it gets worse. First, this chatbot is rather consistently begging you to subscribe to a paid tier of Civitai. Depending on your interaction with said bot, it can even falsely inform you that doing so would allow you to turn off Civchan and replace it with the original CivBot. This is in fact the first time this site's chatbot has ever misinformed me of something. I know it's misinformation because I opened a ticket with Civitai support to ask if it was possible to remove the Civchan bot from my account, and wound up asking if that particular info was true. It was not. Another problem with the substance is that this Civchan is nowhere near as well trained as CivBot. Again, I learned this from support. That inferior training is also why the Civchan bot could lie to me or just make up random seemingly true things. It can also make somewhat violent threats and behave in a manner that would make a lot of people uncomfortable. So why is this important to the functionality of the site? This is frankly because asking CivBot questions, at least basic ones, is far quicker than waiting for a response from Civitai support, or especially the community. When I ask a question of the community, if it gets answered, it usually takes a few days, at which point I've already found a solution for my issue elsewhere, along with a few Khajiit, occasionally. I think Mayak might be following me. And when I asked Civitai support about removing the Civchan joke bot from my account, it took them 22 hours to respond. Think about what a novice or new user would think if they joined the free tier of the site and was informed of CivBot only to have it be Civchan. If this happened on exactly the 1st of April, some, perhaps many, would realize it was just a joke, but many others wouldn't. For good reason, mind you. Not every nation celebrates April Fools as a custom, and in some places similar customs are celebrated at other times of the year. In some places, April Fool's jokes that involve fake news are actually illegal, and frankly for good reason. There have been tragedies that could have been prevented or at least limited if the people hadn't seen certain headlines on April 1st and automatically assumed it was a joke. I don't know if a site's official chatbot lying would fall under such a law, and I don't personally think it should, but it bears considering at least. Said new user would also be more likely to utilize the helper bot for the first time on any other day of the week, meaning a lot of people wouldn't even realize it was a joke. They would start up the site's help bot for the first time and immediately be bombarded with a mix of completely insane tsundere babbling and said bot begging for donations and pushing you to upgrade your subscription to a paid account. And believe me, it's worse than I'm describing. This would at best confuse them, and at worst, convince them to immediately find an alternative. Unfortunately for them, there are precious few alternatives to Civitai that don't require more work on the user's part. It's honestly the best option for new users of something like Stable Diffusion, which somehow makes this worse. It's also pretty much never a good look for a site like this to constantly shove paid plans in its users' faces. In my experience, it can actually make people not want to sign up at all or even regret doing so. It most certainly won't convince people to pay for a premium tier of their subscription. This gets worse, by the way. The Civitai team almost certainly did not know how the bot would act in this manner. Back to those support tickets. According to Civitai support, a third party trained the CivChan bot. I'm going to say that again. This website that has content controls to allow you to turn off the ability to see adult content, and whose normal chatbot is not allowed to breach adult subjects even if they are directly related to your problem, had an outside force create their April Fool's bot that would be up and interacting with their client base for a week straight. The only reasons I can think of to outsource such a thing is that either you can't do it yourself or you don't have the time to do so. Civitai, as an organization, most certainly can do it themselves. This kind of thing is their bread and butter. That only leaves not having the time, and if they didn't have time to train the bot, they most certainly didn't have time to go over someone else's work with a fine-tooth comb and make sure it was user-safe, at least to their own standards. And finally, the poison cherry on this styrofoam cake. By the way, what I'm about to go over may have happened to just me, but I doubt it. At first, you could tell the CivChan bot to speak only as CivBot or enter a specific command into the chat prompt for the same effect, and it would do so, at least to an extent. That eventually became seemingly impossible. I don't know why. So all of this means that Civitai decided a joke was worth actively risking their site's reputation, and even risking losing new users to alternatives. After all, if it takes them up to a day to answer a new support ticket, that new user is probably not going to be happy about that. Allowing quick help with simple things is kind of the entire point of CivBot. They also may be actively risking their users' mental health depending on what the CivChan bot is actually trained to be capable of. For instance, it outright threatened to off me at one point. This was after a series of weird questions, but the mere fact that it can do that is problematic at best. As an interesting note, when my initial ticket was eventually answered by support, the additional questions I posed on that ticket afterward were answered in a relatively short order, usually a couple of minutes at most. When I asked what they were thinking by allowing a third party to create their temporary chatbot, the responses outright stopped. At the point of writing this sentence, it's been 6 hours with no response, and at the point of recording, it's been days. I don't know if this is intentional. I certainly hope it isn't, considering up to this point the support agent, or agents, have been nothing but polite and responsive. Sadly, I've had far too many run-ins with Microsoft, Mojang, and Yahoo customer support to not instinctively suspect the worst of any support agent. But I'm giving this site's support the benefit of the doubt because outside of this single set of interactions, I've had zero contact with said support team. And in these interactions, they were upfront and polite, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, none of this is to say that the company shouldn't have embraced April Fool's Day, but the way they went about it is at best poorly thought out. In most cases, if not all cases of something like this, the site should give you an opt-out option. I'm not sure if this is possible, but barring an opt-out option, Civitai could have just ran both bots concurrently, maybe even had the tsundere bot react to your interactions with CivBot. However, considering the whole mental health issue I went over, I personally believe the CivChan bot should have an opt-out option. Now, CivBot itself has a toggle in your account settings. I tried toggling it off if this bad idea was going to be around for the full week. I didn't want to accidentally engage with it. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to work. The CivChan bot was still in the corner, and still came up when clicked on, and clicking on it accidentally can happen fairly easily. It's literally right above the support button. Giving your client or customer base an opt-out option in regards to such things, ironically, shouldn't be optional. The simplest solution for users is to just not use the bot until the actual CivBot is restored. However, I think I've made it clear why they shouldn't have to wait for that. There is an interesting final thought I had rereading the support tickets. The agent claims, we've received positive feedback for CivChan from the community, and that brought up an old memory. When I was just a teenager, me and my older brother attended a hockey game, one of only two I have ever been to, I believe. During the game, it was announced during the next break, or whatever it's called in hockey, an audience competition would be held. The section that made the most noise through cheering on their team would get free pizza. Me and my brother were sitting in the smallest section of the arena, and said section was only about half full, meaning there should have been no way for us to win at all. Yeah, our section got loud enough to drown out the other sections, and one said pizza. This event is a microcosm of how many online communities work. The loudest segment, even a small segment of people, can drown out anything the rest are saying, even if the rest are not being quiet themselves. This is especially true since, from what I can tell, Civitai doesn't really have a dislike or thumbs down option. So they're likely only receiving proper complaints about this through their support tickets. Oh, before I end the video, I find it disturbingly ironic that this article went up on March 31st, and yet given what is said and implied in the article, Civitai would still release such a chatbot onto their audience. I'll link the article in the description in case anyone's interested. I can't speak to the accuracy of the article, but it's up online for all to see. An addendum? This is unusual for me, but most of the work on the original section was already done when all of this occurred, so this got so much worse. First, the joke bot has been replaced with what I can only describe as a somehow even worse, less useful joke bot. Only this one's not supposed to be a joke, at least I don't think so. However, not only has this one managed to threaten me for asking 2 or 3 simple questions, which it should not be easily capable of as a support bot. Yeah, apparently this thing wants to cut me. It has, according to support, an inbuilt daily limit of questions free users can ask it. I'm not certain if this is true or not, but the support agent seems to think so, and the bot seems to say otherwise. I'm honestly leaning toward the bot being more accurate on this one, because I've unfortunately interacted with it a lot, and it's only stopped answering me for a short time, then started up again, and the support agents have been, at best, not completely honest. This actually gets even worse. It is fairly consistently telling you to subscribe to a paid tier to both get better assistance and remove the limit on questions, despite, the bot itself saying there's no limit, and their support staff claiming to not want to pressure people into a paid service. This bot has the personality of a roided-up gym bro suffering from some kind of narcissistic god delusion, and it constantly interjects that personality into its quote-unquote advice. This often causes the advice to be almost jumbled and poorly worded. Even if English is your first language, it's more often than not hard to understand at best. If English isn't your first language, you likely have no chance of figuring out what it's saying at all. So, it's a support chatbot that's been given an unnecessarily aggressive personality that prevents most useful advice from getting through, constantly extolling the paid tiers of service for its site, and outright contradicting actual support on multiple occasions and on multiple subjects. Now, earlier I told you that a support agent at one point claimed there was no option to alter the bot's personality for paid users. This statement by support was at bare minimum disingenuous, as they have now added the ability to do so, only they have locked it behind a paywall, and I personally believe said support agent almost certainly knew of this coming feature when I asked about it. This gets somehow even worse. There is a command that will, at least for a short time, severely restrict the gym bro personality and make the bot useful again. I'll put it in the description for those interested. However, according to the bot, actually utilizing the original or legacy bot is not truly possible. From what I can tell, the command only creates a filter that the personality can and will circumvent seemingly randomly, making the process potentially even more frustrating, but at least somewhat usable, at least until the bot decides otherwise. Now, this gets worse still. Considering all of the contradictions, even with themselves, the support staff being incompetent is probably the best case scenario. I can't be sure, but it almost seems like they're using AI to write the responses and intentionally making those responses take longer to try and prevent people from realizing it's what they're doing. This idea has come about because if it's not AI or incompetence, then the only other explanation I can think of is malicious misinformation. Here's the thing. When the support agent told me that the site's users had a positive reception to CivChan, this was at bare minimum misinformation. I have looked at several of the comment sections directly related to the situation, and the majority opinion seems to be that Civitai as an organization has a terrible sense of humor and a lack of any real capability. That last part needs some explaining, I guess. Apparently, there have been multiple serious problems with the site, including full on outages, and I don't mean maintenance periods. This means that instead of fixing the site's actual issues, the site runners have decided to spend what I assume is quite a bit of money on this unnecessary downgrade for their support bot, made even worse by the bot itself begging you to become a paid subscriber. This is made even worse by the idea that the bot wasn't even trained by Civitai's people, at least according to their support staff, and we all know how reliable and honest they are at this point. The bot itself tells me it was kind of developed in-house by Civitai, and the support tells me it was developed by a third party. Can you guess which one I believe at this point? Now, the bot itself was more forthcoming about this. According to it, the base was built by another company on an external open-weight LLM. However, all of the fine-tuning was done by Civitai, including user interaction, aka its absurdly unhelpful personality and limiting its scope. Assuming this is true, the support was once again bobbing and weaving around the truth while not quite lying, at least for the most part. Okay, so that's about the bulk of it, unless the situation gets even dumber by the time I've recorded this addendum. Please don't get even dumber. So, two last things. After the previous week and a half of dealing with Civitai's terrible sense of humor and at best poor choices in regards to running their site and support, if it can even be called support at this point, I will under no circumstances ever join a paid tier of their service. I could win the lottery tomorrow and have money to burn, and I would still not give them 1 cent. And finally, that comment I made earlier about them having no real competitors is apparently not entirely true. There are a handful of reasonably well-made alternatives, more limited ones. However, up until now, Civitai was frankly far more user-friendly. Civitai seems to be changing for the worse over time, and fairly soon these alternatives might see this and ramp up their usefulness and user-friendliness, at which point I will almost certainly use one of them instead. Well, that's all I have to say about all this for now, so I'll just say, thank you for listening to my inane ramblings.